Hello and welcome to Biblical Preaching 1. I am Dr. Mewborn, and today we're looking at sermon transitions. It's good to be with you. Let's go ahead and begin our study. I want to talk to you about the idea of how good transitions improve sermons. Sometimes I think of this like the edging of a yard. If you have a yard, sidewalks, things like that, you're going to want to cut the yard. You're going to want to get out there and mow the yard. And once you do that, you can say, wow, we've mowed the yard. And we could just summarize everything by saying that. The problem is that if we don't do the other work that goes with mowing the yard, such as edging the yard, we're going to find ourselves just with a good cut, perhaps, but not a clean cut. The edges don't look clear. You don't see where there's good transitions in the sidewalk. You don't see where lines have changed directions. You don't see that, and that's what really helps you to see the success or the benefits of a good landscaping type of job. And so I think it's important to make sure that we have good transitions with our main body of the sermon. Good transitions with the main body of the sermon, because what it does, and it's what's similar to, is like the edging of a yard. Yes, we've done most of the work already, but the edging is the way to make it stand out. It's the way to make it pop sometimes. It gives it the cleanest look. And so I think this is kind of a good way to look at it and see that extra bit of work will help you in delivering great sermons. All right, so let's kind of start with transitions in the introduction or introductions. We start with confidence. We should start our sermons with confidence. So the idea of transitioning into them with confidence, we're going to need to have the appropriate verbiage or wording that we're going to want to say in order to get the best attention or maybe even a reaction just from the beginning. And so we kind of want to start with a bang. I would say don't apologize for the message that God has given you when you start it. Sometimes people use apologies to start messages. They use these phrases, I guess we'll start out with, I got a few thoughts for you today, and I hope you appreciate these. I've been in the Word some, and, I want you to hear a little bit of my heart, I don't want to step on anybody's toes today, but I've been able to put a little bit of work into this. Whatever you might say at the beginning, it's going to matter. And I would be careful not to apologize for a message that God has given you, but speak with boldness, speak with authority. You're standing on the Word of God, not your own personal thoughts or what you come up with per se. We are preaching expositionally, or we're preaching expositorily, so therefore we ought to be standing on the Word of God and let that come out. So let's be careful how we start with confidence, even in our transition into the introduction and then into the main part of the sermon. Preview appropriately. Offer the correct transitions based on inductive and deductive sermons. Now, an inductive sermon is going to start kind of more with a question mark and kind of giving an idea of something, or maybe pointing you towards something, but the true punchline, if you will, or the final major thought, you're going to find that and discover that over time in the inductive approach. And so you'll be giving the biggest and main point, bringing it all together toward the end of an inductive message, because we know this information, therefore this is what we know now, and that's kind of the idea. Deductive's different. Deductive starts with the main idea and then fleshes it out or explains it throughout the message. Most sermons today, I would say, are deductive in nature. You start with a theme or a thesis or a proposition or whatever it might be at the beginning, and then after that you explain it, then you illustrate it, you apply it, you show application for it, those types of things, and you will give that in a deductive approach. And so these are different. So when we think of inductive, our transitions into that might bring about more questions or point you to the next thing, but bringing about questions to get you to a final climactic point where you say, hey, this is what I've been talking about. This is what the scripture is revealing to us. You would use that more so in a narrative type of sermon for sure, but the deductive approach, you'll come out strongly with a main point at the beginning. So in the introduction, you're going to use the introduction as kind of a transition to tee up what you're going to talk about. And so when you create those transitions, it's going to lead you right into the main point, or maybe the title of the sermon, or maybe the proposition of the sermon, the gospel objective that you have of the sermon, whatever it might be. And you're going to preview that appropriately at that time. Then connect quickly. Point the congregation to the main content quickly and clearly. Transitions will help you do this. They will help point you right where you're supposed to go. They are going to maybe go from introductory remarks, maybe a fun introduction, maybe bringing out some statistics, bringing out some questions, bringing out a quick story, whatever it might be, and then it will transition you. You'll go from the introductory remarks and kind of a clear introduction, and that transition will transition you right into what you're going to say in the main content. And so oftentimes what I do in my sermons is I will start, if I'm preaching at a church I've never been before, I will give some introductory remarks of who I am and how I'm connected to that church, what I know about that church. I will go into a short introduction, maybe 3 to 5 minutes long. Maybe it's a story that would connect with them. And then I will go right into maybe the title of the message, and that will lead me into reading of the text. So I will transition into that title, and it will do that, and it'll allow me to go right to the text. Other times what I'll do is I'll go from the introduction, I'll give an idea of what I'm going to talk about, then I read the text, and then after that I give a clear transition by speaking about the title of the message. And sometimes I'll do it that way, which is helpful as well. But connect people quickly in that introduction, and then use the title to transition to the body of the sermon. I think this is a great and easy way to transition into the main part of the sermon, the main body of the sermon. And so use the title in that. The title should be able to kind of stand alone. It should also say something very clearly about where you're going or what you want to accomplish. And create a transitional sentence or a couple of sentences at that moment to move toward the title, and then that title will send you right into the main content of the sermon. Okay, now thinking about transitions, let's go past the introduction, and now we have transitioned into perhaps saying the title, and now we're into the main body of the sermon. What you want to do here is you want to create distinctions between points. All right, so move to the next point using unique words and phrases. I think it's good not to just always say the word point 1, point 2, point 3, or idea 1, idea 2, idea 3. But maybe we can use better words than that. And we're talking about the ways of following Christ, the benefits of following Christ, the dangers of false teachers or false teaching. You can talk about these words, these buzzwords that'll come out, and we can use those type of words in our outline, but we can transition into those outline or main points of those outlines using transitional sentence. And maybe a way of doing that would be to say, have you considered the danger of false teachers? Have you considered the danger of false teaching? Have you considered what it's getting people to do in that transition is getting them to think about the next point? Have you thought about, have you considered, or consider this, or bring attention to something? You want to, in these transitions, you want to tee up whatever's coming next and get them to look at it. Now look with me at. That's a transitional type of statement. Now look with me at the ways we can follow Christ. And as we look at this first way, I want you to see that the way of following Christ begins at the feet of Jesus. making these things up on the fly here, but I think if we grab people with that transition and we get them to look or consider something, we'll do it will be better for the actual the points that we've already constructed. And so create distinctions between main points, also show similarities between main points. Transitions should bridge the gaps between points while connecting them to the main topic. This is a very important thought. You want your transitional statements in between each point. So for instance, let's give a thought on this. If you want to have point, explanation, illustration, application, and then right before you're going to go to your next point, you need to have a transition. So you're going to give that maybe point one, you're going to have the point, then you're going to have the explanation, illustration, application, transition, next point. And that's how you're going to flow. So it's going to be important to bridge the gap between what you just learned. Now that we've heard whatever it might be, let us consider this next thought. And that's moving people into thinking about something new. It finishes a thought, but now it brings you to something new. It keeps the sequencing there. It keeps it synthesized in some ways. It keeps it kind of focused on the main topic, and it's showing how there's a unity within your message. So some things to look at there. Slow down as needed. I think this is a good one to look at. A car should slow down on the curves, right? We should be careful when changing direction. So if a car is going to turn right and it's a sharp turn, we need to slow down for that and make sure we do it deliberately, intentionally, and that it looks that it has a good feel about it, so that kind of holds the road. You don't spin out of control, but it holds the road as you're getting into your next point. And I think that we should do this on transitions so that people can see, I've finished that previous point, I'm moving on to the next point. Let's consider this one, and I've teed it up now, and I'm ready to move forward with it. And then next, be intentional where to place the transitions. Place transitions in appropriate places. Sometimes they come after the explanations of the text. So here's a great point. When we're thinking about where we place a transition, sometimes, especially in a more narrative type of sermon, I will put the transition into the point. I will put that after the explanation. For instance, I will start into point one of my message. And let's say I'm preaching through a narrative in Paul's life or a narrative in Joshua's life in the Old Testament. And I'm walking through this narrative. And then what I might do, kind of the start of point one or point two or point three or whatever, at the start of it, I will say, let's see what the text says about let's see what the text says next, or let's consider what the text says here. I'll read that passage, I will explain that passage a little bit, and then I will transition into a point, and I will give a main point then at that time. And so sometimes I put the points before I read the text. Sometimes I put them even after the explanation of the text. It just depends on what the text demands. What is the text doing? If it's a doctrinal type of sermon or very theological in nature, then I oftentimes will state the point first, and then I will read the text, then I'll explain it, then I'll give illustration application, and most likely I'll repeat the point again before I go into my transition to my next point. So those are some ways to think about being intentional where to place the transitions, okay? And hopefully that helps a little bit, all right? Let's continue on here. Talking about conclusion. Avoid in the conclusion, as we move past, now we're moving from the last point in the body of the sermon to the conclusion. I would be careful, similar to that in the introduction, be careful in the conclusion. Avoid apologizing as you close the message. Don't say, well, anyway, that could have been clear, but let's go ahead and close out. Or I wish we had more time. We haven't really gotten the point of that section. I mean, these are terrible things to say because people feel like they're missing out. They feel like they're not getting what they're supposed to be getting. And so you don't want to apologize for that. You don't want to say, oh, well, where's my time gone? We don't need to say that because people feel like, well, you had more and you can't share that with us. I mean, what happened? And so let's try to avoid that. Let's be very intentional. As we talked about in conclusions, make sure we get the conclusion out there. And because that's where we sum up everything. That's where we bring it all together. And that has to be a part of the message. So if you really have a 4-minute, let's say 4-minute conclusion, you need to make sure that you cut something earlier in the message than to cut something at the end of it. Don't cut the conclusion because you've really built it up. Make sure that you say your conclusion. Don't apologize for it. And don't cut it quickly. Don't just jump into a gospel invitation. You need to make sure you get that whole conclusion out there. It's very important. Review the main points. This is going to be a big part of the transition. Restate the transitions in the body of the sermon. So if one of the words that you like to use, have you considered, maybe that word considered, or now that we've looked at, or now that we've thought about, using words like that in your transitions is helpful because you can restate them in the conclusion, and that'll allow you to review some of the main points there. Using some of the similar language, even changing it if need be. Announce the conclusion without saying it. I think this is a great thing to do here. People should know that we are concluding our sermons, but we don't need to say in conclusion or as I close. They need to know that we are finishing up the message, but we don't have to tell them that. We can just do a start in with kind of a review of what we've already said, or we can just go into this thought, this final thought, if you will, of wrapping it all together. And when we do that, that conclusion will just start to sing by itself. You won't have to announce it. It'll just happen. And you'll have that moment where you can review the points. You'll have that moment where you would call people to an action. We will call people to think and act and do and believe and all those things, the action there. And then we can also, as a part of that, have a gospel invitation, have an opportunity, whether it's to join the church. All that can be a part of that at the end if you have that kind of thing in your invitation. But gospel invitation is a big part of this, of how you're going to bring that all to an end. This is just looking back at a previous slide. Don't announce that you're concluding, especially if you don't mean it. Don't just circle the airport. Don't just do that over and over and over again and continue to say I'm concluding, but you're not. So let's be careful not to do that. Kind of as a reminder, Michael Didaway said, 5 keys to powerful conclusions, kind of ending them with this, with focus toward Christ, ending them with emotional intensity, a specific response, making it personal, because it is personal. It's calling people to an action, whether it's to stop doing something or start doing something. That's a big deal. And we're calling people to do that. So we need to be careful and thoughtful about that. And of course, always give an opportunity to receive Christ and expect people to respond. In a future lesson, we're going to talk about gospel invitations and how to really lay those out. And I think that'll be a helpful way to talk about this very aspect here and as a 5th point. Great transitions are underrated. Offering appropriate and riveting transitions will improve your preaching immediately. We need to consider this. It will help us greatly. So let me give you the benefits of good transitions. I want to walk through these because I think they're helpful. Number 1, good transitions keep people interested in the topic. That's absolutely correct. They keep you interested in the topic. Good transitions draw attention to the main points. That's a big part of what they're doing. They're drawing attention to the main points. They're teeing them up, if you will, so that you can get a great hit there. Think about that. Good transitions help preachers memorize points. The reason for that is the better the transition and the more, or if you've memorized it, it'll allow you to memorize what's coming next. And so transitions will lead you right into the next thing, which also helps with eye contact. Good transitions allow for more eye contact with the audience. these two things, memorizing points and great eye contact, will help you engage your audience, and it will improve your messages greatly. And then good transitions help the flow of the sermon. Well, of course they do, because you're going from one thing to the next. It's not clunky. It's not choppy. You know where you're going. There's smooth change of direction at times. There is this feeling of a cadence or a rhythmic feel of, I'm going to the next thing now, and stay with me as I continue on through this. People will come to know what to expect when you have good transitions, which is helpful for them when they're taking notes, things like that. So these are some of the benefits of good transitions. There's others I'm sure that we could consider, but these are some of the ones that I think are probably the most helpful and can help us to write the best transitions we can. All right. Well, this has been Sermon Transitions. Good to be with you today. God bless you, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.